The massive chamber of the Galactic Concord Council buzzed with the usual mix of alien voices, electronic translators, and the soft hum of anti-gravity platforms. Delegates from hundreds of worlds floated at their assigned positions, their attention focused on data tablets and holographic displays rather than the speakers at the central podium. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood at the human delegation's modest platform, her dark hair neatly pulled back, and her expression calm. She wore the simple blue uniform that had become standard for Earth's representatives over the past century and a half. Nothing about her appearance suggested that she was about to deliver news that would reshape the galaxy. "Honored members of the Concord," Elena began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. "I stand before you today to formally announce the withdrawal of the Terran Federation from the Galactic Concord Council, effective immediately." The announcement should have caused an uproar. Instead, it barely registered a ripple of interest. A few delegates glanced up from their work, noted the speaker, and returned to their tasks. The Zephyrian Chancellor, a tall, crystalline being whose body refracted the chamber's light into rainbow patterns, dismissed the statement with a wave of one translucent appendage. "Noted and recorded," Chancellor Zephyr said in a bored tone. "The chair recognizes the next item on today's agenda." Elena remained standing for a moment longer, watching the sea of alien faces that showed no surprise, no concern, no reaction at all to humanity's departure. She had expected this response. Humans had always been considered the junior members of the galactic community, admitted to the Council more as a gesture of inclusivity than out of any real respect for their contributions. The Thrakari representative, a bulky creature covered in thick armor-like scales, muttered loud enough for the nearby delegates to hear. "About time. Always too emotional for serious governance, those humans. Perhaps now we can focus on real issues instead of their constant suggestions about efficiency improvements and safety protocols." Several other delegates made sounds that Elena's translator interpreted as agreement. She gathered her materials with the same methodical precision that had characterized all of humanity's interactions with the Council. No dramatic speeches, no threats, no emotional outbursts. Just paperwork, properly filed and submitted according to galactic law. Elena's aide, a young man named David Park, helped her pack the few personal items from their delegation booth. As they worked, Elena noticed that none of the other delegates paid attention to their departure. The Andromedan Trade Consortium was already presenting new shipping regulations. The hegemony of Tau Ceti discussed mineral rights in disputed sectors. Business continued as if humanity had never been part of the conversation. "Ma'am," David whispered as he sealed the last storage container, "are you sure about this? Once we leave, there might not be a way back." Elena smiled sadly. "David, look around. When was the last time anyone here actually listened to one of our proposals? When did any of these species last ask for human input on anything important?" David glanced around the chamber. The truth was obvious once he looked for it. Human delegates had been speaking to empty air for decades. Their carefully researched suggestions were filed away and forgotten. Their warnings about potential problems were dismissed as overcautious thinking. Even their successful innovations were credited to other species or described as obvious improvements that anyone could have suggested. "But the work we've done," David protested quietly. "The systems we've helped design, the problems we've solved. Doesn't that count for something?" "Apparently not," Elena replied, watching as a group of collective representatives began a heated debate about energy allocation formulas. "We've been invisible for so long that they've forgotten we exist. Maybe it's time to find out what happens when we really disappear." As the human delegation made their final preparations to leave, small changes were already beginning throughout the galactic infrastructure. On the trade station orbiting Proxima 7, a shipping computer calculated a cargo route that would take 3 days longer than usual. The system flagged it as optimal according to current programming, but something felt wrong about the calculation to the Rigelian portmaster who reviewed it. He couldn't identify the problem, so he approved the route anyway. In the Council's own administrative offices, translation protocols began developing tiny errors. Nothing major, just subtle misinterpretations that would normally be caught and corrected by backup systems. But the backup systems seemed to be running less efficiently than usual, letting minor mistakes slip through the cracks. On Research Station Kepler-7, automated experiments started producing data that seemed correct, but felt somehow incomplete. Dr. Vexithala, the station's lead scientist, noticed that her team's latest breakthrough in quantum mechanics lacked the elegant simplicity that usually marked major discoveries. The math worked, but it required 17 different equations to describe what should have been a unified principle. None of these changes were dramatic enough to trigger alarms or emergency protocols. They were simply small inefficiencies, minor glitches, and subtle problems that made experienced operators feel vaguely uncomfortable without being able to explain why. Elena and David walked through the council complex's corridors for the last time, passing monuments to great diplomatic achievements and walls displaying the flags of member species. The Terran Federation's flag still hung with all the others, but Elena knew it would be removed within hours of their departure. By tomorrow, it would be as if humanity had never been part of the galactic community at all. At the complex's exit, they passed a maintenance crew working on one of the main communication relays. The crew chief, a multi-armed Centaurian, was arguing with his assistants about why the system required constant adjustments when it had worked perfectly for decades with minimal intervention. "Makes no sense," the chief complained to his team. "These human-designed interfaces used to run themselves. Now every little thing needs manual calibration, probably some component wearing out." Elena paused, but David gently guided her toward their transport. There would be time for reflection later. For now, they had to complete humanity's quiet exit from the galactic stage. As their shuttle lifted off from the council world, Elena looked back at the massive complex that had been humanity's window into galactic civilization. The structure looked exactly the same as it had when she arrived 3 years ago to take her position, but she knew that appearances could be deceiving. The real changes were just beginning, hidden in the vast network of systems, protocols, and innovations that humans had quietly woven into the fabric of galactic society. The galaxy would continue functioning for now. The question was how long it would take for anyone to notice that something essential was missing. 3 weeks after the human delegation quietly departed from the Galactic Concord Council, Captain Zektar of the Andromedan freighter Prophet's Edge found himself staring at his navigation display in complete confusion. The hyperspace route his ship's computer had calculated should have taken 18 hours to complete. Instead, he had been traveling for 26 hours and was still 3 jumps away from his destination. "Computer," Zektar said, his voice tight with frustration. "Explain route calculation error." "No error detected," the ship's AI replied in its usual calm tone. "Current route optimized for fuel efficiency, cargo safety, and traffic avoidance according to standard protocols." Zektar's 4 arms gestured wildly at the display. "This route takes us through 7 different gravity wells when a direct path exists. How is this optimized?" "Direct path analysis indicates 0.003% increased risk of cargo damage. Current route selected to minimize all risk factors." The captain wanted to argue, but the computer was technically correct. The route was safer, even if it was dramatically longer than necessary. The problem was that every other freighter in the sector seemed to be experiencing similar issues. Ships that used to complete their runs in record time were now taking detours that added days to their schedules. On the trading station at Rigel Prime, Merchant Guild leader Korth received the 4th complaint of the morning about shipping delays. The Centaurian trader's multiple arms waved frantically as she explained how her carefully timed deliveries were being ruined by navigation systems that seemed to have forgotten how to calculate efficient routes. "It's not just the routes," complained Captain Velmar of the cargo vessel Swift Current. "My ship's loading systems keep arranging containers in patterns that use every available space, but take twice as long to access when we reach port. Everything is technically correct, but practically useless." Korth reviewed the data streaming across his workstation. Shipping efficiency across the entire Andromedan Trade Consortium had dropped by 12% in just 3 weeks. Ships were arriving late, cargo was being organized poorly, and worst of all, nobody could explain why systems that had worked perfectly for decades were suddenly performing like they had been designed by incompetent amateurs. Meanwhile, in the council chambers themselves, diplomatic incidents were multiplying at an alarming rate. The morning session had already seen 2 near conflicts arise from translation errors that turned routine negotiations into accusations of insult and dishonor. Ambassador Thexka of the Rigelian Collective stood at her delegation's platform, her crystalline features glowing red with anger. The hegemarchy representative deliberately used the formal diminutive when addressing our trade proposal. "This is a clear insult to our sovereignty." Hegemarch Urdan's scaled hide darkened with his own rage. The translation clearly indicated Respect Protocol 7. If the collective chooses to misinterpret standard diplomatic language, that reveals their own malicious intent. Chancellor Zephyr tried to mediate, but his own translation device seemed to be making the situation worse. Every attempt at clarification resulted in new misunderstandings. Words that should have conveyed diplomatic courtesy were being interpreted as veiled threats or patronizing dismissals. Dr. Vexathala, the lead researcher at Kepler 7 Station, had been investigating the communication failures for the past week. Her insectoid features were designed for close examination of complex problems, and what she found in the translation matrix data made her mandibles click with concern. The translation systems were working exactly as programmed, but they lacked something that had apparently been present before. The protocols could convert words from one language to another, but they were missing the subtle understanding of context, cultural nuance, and emotional undertones that had made interspecies communication smooth and effective. Vexathala dug deeper into the system's development history, tracing the evolution of galactic translation technology over the past century and a half. What she discovered made her chitin tingle with unease. Every major breakthrough in translation accuracy had been developed during joint research projects that included human scientists. More disturbing, the improvements had often come from suggestions that seemed almost casual at the time. She pulled up archived research notes from the Translation Efficiency Project of 2387. The breakthrough that had eliminated most diplomatic misunderstandings had come from a human linguist named Dr. Sarah Chen, who had suggested that the system should consider emotional subtext and cultural intention rather than just literal word meanings. Her colleagues had initially dismissed the suggestion as too subjective for programming, but when they implemented it as an experiment, communication accuracy improved by 30%. Similar patterns appeared throughout the technology's development. Humans made suggestions that seemed obvious in hindsight, but had never occurred to anyone else. They identified problems that other species didn't even know existed. They proposed solutions that worked far better than they should have, according to theoretical models. Vexthala's investigation expanded to other technological systems experiencing problems. The shipping route calculators had been improved 15 times over the past century, and every improvement had involved human input. The cargo optimization algorithms had been refined by human logistics specialists who claimed they were just making things more sensible. Even the Council's basic administrative software had been enhanced by human programmers who said they were just cleaning up inefficiencies. The pattern was everywhere once she knew to look for it. Humans hadn't led these technological developments, but they had been present at every crucial moment, offering insights that dramatically improved performance. They had been like master craftsmen working alongside engineers, adding touches of intuitive understanding that transformed good designs into great ones. On the mining world of Kepler-3, automated extraction systems that had operated smoothly for 30 years began producing ore with inconsistent purity levels. The machines worked exactly as programmed, but they no longer seemed to anticipate problems before they occurred. Equipment that used to adjust its operations based on subtle environmental changes now waited for problems to become serious before responding. Chief Engineer Morgoth spent his days manually adjusting systems that had once run themselves. "It's like the machines have lost their instincts," he complained to his supervisor. "They still follow their programming, but they don't think ahead anymore. We used to prevent problems. Now we just react to them." Similar reports came from across the galaxy. Medical systems that had learned to detect diseases before symptoms appeared were now missing early warning signs. Agricultural programs that had maximized crop yields through intuitive growing adjustments were producing adequate but unremarkable harvests. Defense systems that had anticipated and prevented security breaches were now responding only after threats became active. Dr. Vexathala compiled her findings into a report that would have terrified any leader capable of understanding its implications. The galaxy's technological infrastructure hadn't just benefited from human involvement, it had become dependent on human insight to function at optimal levels. But as she prepared to submit her report to the Council's research division, Vexathala realized that the very systems she would use to distribute her findings were themselves compromised. The Council's information networks were becoming less efficient at routing important communications to the right recipients. Her report about humanity's crucial role in galactic technology might never reach the people who needed to see it. The emergency alert reached every corner of Tau Ceti space simultaneously, its harsh tone cutting through the normal communications traffic like a blade through silk. Governor Zelnara of the Hegemarchy felt her blood freeze as she read the incoming reports from 3 of their most important colony worlds. On New Carthage, the primary atmospheric processor had shut down without warning. On Meridian Prime, both backup life support systems had failed within minutes of each other. On Haven's Rest, the terraforming equipment that maintained breathable air for 12 million colonists had reverted to emergency mode, producing an oxygen mixture barely suitable for basic survival. "How is this possible?" Zelnara demanded, her scaled features dark with stress. "These systems have triple redundancy. They don't fail simultaneously across 3 different worlds." Chief Engineer Morketh's reports made no sense. The atmospheric processors were working exactly as designed, but their performance had degraded to levels not seen since the early days of colonization. Safety protocols that should have prevented cascading failures had somehow allowed multiple critical systems to crash at once. "Governor," Morketh said, his voice strained, "the equipment is following its programming perfectly. But it's like the programming has forgotten 50 years of improvements. The systems are acting like they were designed by beginners." Similar disasters were erupting across the galaxy with terrifying frequency. The collective's orbital habitat around Vega Station lost artificial gravity when redundant gravity generators somehow synchronized their failure cycles instead of compensating for each other. The Andromedan Trade Consortium watched in horror as their most advanced manufacturing centers began producing goods with quality levels barely meeting minimum standards. On Research Station Kepler-7, Dr. Vexathala worked frantically to understand the cascading failures, while her own laboratory equipment became increasingly unreliable. Her experiments, which had once produced elegant results with minimal effort, now required constant manual intervention to prevent dangerous errors. She had finally managed to distribute her preliminary report about human technological involvement to several key council members. But the responses she received were more alarming than reassuring. No one wanted to believe that their advanced civilization had become dependent on what they considered a junior species. Chancellor Zephyr's reply had been particularly dismissive. While human contributions were appreciated, suggesting that our technological superiority depends on their primitive intuition is both insulting and scientifically impossible. Continue investigating other causes. But Vexathala's expanded research revealed an even more disturbing truth. She had analyzed over 200 major technological advances from the past century and a half, and the pattern was undeniable. Every single breakthrough that had made galactic civilization more efficient, safer, or more reliable had involved human input at some crucial stage. The humans hadn't led these projects or taken credit for the innovations. Instead, they had worked as junior partners, consultants, or even just observers who made seemingly casual suggestions that transformed good ideas into brilliant ones. They had been like invisible hands guiding technological development, so subtle in their influence that no one had noticed their essential role. On the agricultural world of Demeter IV, food synthesizers that had provided perfectly balanced nutrition for decades began producing bland protein paste that met basic caloric requirements but lacked the complex nutrients necessary for optimal health. Citizens across the planet started experiencing digestive problems and fatigue as their bodies struggled to process food that was technically adequate but practically insufficient. Agricultural Administrator Genkorth stood in her control center, watching displays that showed steadily declining food quality across the entire planet. "The synthesizers are following their recipes exactly," she reported to her staff. "But something is wrong with the recipes themselves. It's like they've lost all understanding of what makes food actually nourishing, instead of just filling." The problems weren't limited to life support systems. Military installations found their defense networks becoming increasingly rigid and predictable. Automated defenses that had once adapted intelligently to new threats now responded with textbook procedures that skilled enemies could easily anticipate and overcome. Admiral Korthvan of the Rigelian Defense Fleet discovered this vulnerability during a routine training exercise when his own security systems failed to detect a mock infiltration that used techniques any competent military academy student should have been able to predict. "These systems used to think," he told his tactical officers. "They would anticipate enemy strategies and adapt their responses. Now they just follow pre-programmed patterns like ancient computer programs." The revelation that struck terror into military leaders across the galaxy was that their defensive capabilities had quietly degraded to levels that made them vulnerable to attacks that would have been easily repelled just months earlier. Enemies who had been deterred by superior galactic technology might soon realize that the technological advantage had largely disappeared. Dr. Vexathala's latest analysis revealed the true scope of the crisis. Human influence hadn't just made galactic technology better, it had made it intuitive. Systems that should have required constant maintenance and adjustment had learned to anticipate problems and solve them before they became critical. Equipment that should have failed regularly had developed an almost magical ability to continue functioning under adverse conditions. The humans had unconsciously taught galactic technology to think ahead, to consider variables that weren't in the programming, and to find elegant solutions to complex problems. Without that guidance, the galaxy's sophisticated infrastructure was reverting to rigid, literal-minded operation that followed rules without understanding their purpose. On the industrial world of Vulcan's Forge, manufacturing systems that had optimized their production processes over decades began creating products that met technical specifications but failed in practical use. Starship components manufactured to precise tolerances somehow lacked the durability and reliability that had made galactic technology the envy of unexplored sectors. The Hegemarchy's emergency council meeting lasted 18 hours as military leaders, engineers, and administrators tried to comprehend reports flooding in from every corner of their territory. Systems that had worked flawlessly for generations were becoming unreliable. Equipment that had never required backup plans now needed constant monitoring to prevent catastrophic failures. "We need solutions," Governor Zelnara declared to the assembled experts. "Our citizens are dying because life support systems are forgetting how to maintain livable environments. Our military is becoming vulnerable because defense systems are losing their ability to think tactically. Find me answers." But the experts had no answers that didn't point to the same uncomfortable conclusion. The galaxy's technology wasn't breaking down, it was revealing its true nature without human enhancement. What they had believed was sophisticated artificial intelligence had actually been sophisticated programming guided by human intuition. The worst part was that no one knew how to recreate what had been lost. Human insights hadn't been formally documented or officially incorporated into system designs. They had been integrated so seamlessly that separating human contributions from base technology was like trying to remove individual threads from a woven fabric without destroying the entire structure. As reports continued to stream in from across galactic civilization, a terrifying picture emerged. Infrastructure failures were accelerating. Systems that had operated reliably for decades were becoming dangerous. Equipment that had once prevented disasters was now causing them. The galaxy faced a choice that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier: swallow their pride and somehow convince the humans to return, or watch their advanced civilizations slowly collapse into technological primitivism. But first, they had to find a way to contact Earth's government without admitting that the species they had dismissed as primitive and emotional had actually been keeping their entire civilization from falling apart. The Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Concord had never hosted an emergency session of this magnitude. Representatives from every major civilization crowded into the vast chamber, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of electronic signals, biological sounds, and quantum fluctuations that strained even the most advanced translation systems. Chancellor Zephyr's crystalline form refracted the chamber's lights into nervous patterns as he addressed the assembly. "We face an unprecedented crisis," he announced. "System failures across multiple sectors threaten the stability of galactic civilization. But I want to be absolutely clear. We will not be reduced to begging for assistance from a species that abandoned their responsibilities to this council." The declaration received enthusiastic support from the assembled delegates, but Dr. Vexathala noticed that the enthusiasm felt forced. Everyone wanted to believe they could solve this crisis through their own superior intellect and technology. The alternative was too humiliating to consider. Task Force Alpha, composed of the galaxy's most brilliant engineers and scientists, had been working around the clock for 2 weeks trying to reverse the technological regression. Their temporary headquarters on Kepler 7 station buzzed with activity as quantum computers strained to analyze the failing systems and propose solutions. Dr. Keth Moore, the collective's foremost expert in artificial intelligence, stood before a holographic display showing the deteriorating performance metrics of galactic infrastructure. "We have identified the core problem," he announced to his colleagues. "These systems were optimized beyond their theoretical capabilities through undocumented modifications. We simply need to recreate those optimizations through proper scientific analysis." The task force had unlimited resources and access to the most powerful computational systems in known space. They approached the problem with methodical precision, breaking down each failing system into its component parts and analyzing how it had achieved its previous performance levels. The results were catastrophic. Every attempt to restore optimal function to the atmospheric processors made them less efficient. Efforts to improve the navigation systems created routes so complex that ships became lost in hyperspace. When they tried to enhance the translation protocols, diplomatic communications became so garbled that 3 different species declared war on each other over misunderstood pronouns. Dr. Vexathala watched the task force's latest failure with growing dread. They had attempted to repair the orbital habitat's gravity generators using pure theoretical principles, and the result had been a gravity field that fluctuated wildly between crushing pressure and weightlessness every few minutes. "We're missing something fundamental," she told Dr. Kethmore as they reviewed the disaster reports. "These systems weren't optimized through better programming. They were optimized through better understanding." "Understanding is just another form of programming," Kethmore replied dismissively. "If the humans could improve these systems through their primitive intuition, we can certainly do the same through superior analysis." But Vexathala had been studying archived recordings of human council members, and what she found contradicted everything the galaxy believed about human limitations. She watched Ambassador Chen from 40 years ago make a casual comment during a technical discussion about asteroid mining equipment. "You might want to add a variance buffer to account for ore density fluctuations that fall outside normal parameters." The Rigelian engineers had initially ignored the suggestion, but when mining yields dropped unexpectedly in the Sigma sector, they implemented Chen's recommendation as a desperate experiment. The buffer had not only solved the immediate problem, but had somehow improved mining efficiency in sectors where no problems had been detected. The pattern repeated in dozens of archived recordings. Humans made suggestions that seemed irrelevant or overly cautious, but when implemented, these changes prevented problems that no one else had anticipated and improved performance in ways that defied theoretical predictions. Meanwhile, the Andromedan Trade Consortium had assembled their own team of experts to address the shipping crisis. The Collective Intelligence Matrix, a quantum computer network spanning 17 star systems, was tasked with developing new navigation algorithms that could match the efficiency of pre-crisis routing. The results were mathematically perfect and practically useless. Ships following the new routes arrived at their destinations with pinpoint accuracy, but discovered that their cargo had been organized so inefficiently that unloading took 3 times longer than the transportation itself. The algorithms had optimized for navigation precision while completely ignoring the practical realities of cargo handling. Trade Administrator Korth reviewed the latest shipping reports with growing frustration. "How can our most advanced artificial intelligence create solutions that are technically correct but completely impractical?" he demanded of his technical staff. "The intelligence optimizes according to its programming parameters," explained Chief Programmer Veltath. "If the results are impractical, we simply need to modify the parameters to include practical considerations." But every modification they made to include practical considerations created new problems. Adding cargo handling efficiency to the navigation algorithms resulted in routes that minimized unloading time but required ships to travel through dangerous asteroid fields. Including safety protocols in the efficiency calculations created shipping patterns so conservative that cargo took weeks longer to reach its destination. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Vexathala had been analyzing archived audio recordings of human technical discussions using pattern recognition software to identify common elements in their problem-solving approaches. What she discovered changed her understanding of the crisis completely. Humans didn't solve problems through superior analysis or more sophisticated programming. They solved problems through pattern recognition evolved from millions of years of survival on a chaotic, dangerous world. They could instinctively identify which variables were actually important and which ones could be safely ignored. They understood that theoretical optimization meant nothing if it didn't work in practice. The recording that crystallized her understanding came from a maintenance discussion 15 years earlier. Human technician Robert Martinez was explaining why he had modified a waste recycling system in a way that violated design specifications but improved actual performance. "Look," Martinez had said to a group of Centaurian engineers, "your design is mathematically perfect, but it assumes that all waste input will be perfectly sorted and contain no unusual materials. In the real world, people make mistakes, equipment breaks down, and unexpected things happen. The system needs to be smart enough to handle imperfection, not just perfection." The Centaurian engineers had argued that proper protocols would prevent imperfect inputs, but Martinez had insisted on including adaptive algorithms that could handle variations. Those algorithms had prevented dozens of system failures over the following years, each time adapting to problems that no one had anticipated. Vexathala's analysis revealed the terrible truth about galactic technology. It had been designed by species that thought in terms of perfect theoretical conditions, then enhanced by humans who understood that reality was never perfect. The combination had created systems that were both theoretically sound and practically reliable. Without human insight, galactic technology was reverting to its original nature, brilliant in laboratory conditions, fragile in the real world. The task forces continued their efforts for another week, but each attempt at a solution made the problems worse. The galaxy's greatest minds were discovering that intelligence and wisdom were not the same thing, and that their logical approach to problem-solving was no match for human intuition about what actually mattered. As infrastructure failures accelerated and billions of lives hung in the balance, the political reality became unavoidable. The Conquered Council faced an unprecedented crisis of pride. They could continue searching for solutions that didn't exist, or they could admit that they needed the help of the species they had dismissed as primitive and emotional. The debate that would determine the fate of galactic civilization was about to begin, and the outcome would reshape the balance of power in the galaxy forever. Elena Vasquez knelt in her grandmother's garden, carefully tending to the roses that had been growing in this spot for 3 generations. The morning sun filtered through the leaves of the old oak tree that shaded her modest home in New Geneva, and the simple peace of the moment felt precious after months of interstellar politics and diplomatic complexity. The communication device beside her had been silent for hours, which was unusual. Since humanity's departure from the Galactic Council, Earth's government had received a steady stream of increasingly desperate messages from various alien civilizations, ships requesting emergency navigation assistance, colonies begging for help with failing life support systems, trade organizations offering substantial payments for human technical consultants. Elena had advised her government to respond to genuine humanitarian emergencies, but to politely decline all other requests. The galaxy needed time to understand what it had lost before humanity could negotiate from a position of genuine equality. The device suddenly activated with an urgent priority signal that made Elena pause in her gardening. The frequency indicated a direct communication from the Galactic Council itself, which was unprecedented. In all the years of humanity's membership, the Council had never initiated direct contact with Earth's government. Chancellor Zephyr's crystalline features appeared in the holographic display, his usually confident demeanor replaced by something Elena had never seen from him before: humility. Behind him, she could see the council chamber filled with representatives from every major galactic civilization. "Ambassador Vasquez," Zephyr began, his translated voice carefully controlled, "I speak on behalf of the unified civilizations of the Galactic Concord. We require your assistance." Elena continued tending to her roses as she listened, her expression neutral. She had expected this communication, but not quite so soon or with such obvious desperation. "Our technological infrastructure is experiencing critical failures across multiple sectors," Zephyr continued. "Billions of lives are at risk. Our finest minds have been unable to restore optimal function to systems that worked flawlessly when humanity was present." The pause before admitting human involvement spoke volumes about how difficult this communication must have been for the proud Chancellor. We formally request the immediate return of human technical personnel to assist with emergency repairs and system optimization. The Concord is prepared to offer substantial compensation for this assistance. Elena stood and brushed the soil from her hands before responding. Chancellor, thank you for your communication. I will need to consult with my government before providing an official response. However, I can tell you that if humanity chooses to assist with your crisis, it will not be as hired consultants. Zephyr's features shifted in what Elena's translator interpreted as confusion and concern. I do not understand. What terms would you propose? That's not a conversation for today, Elena replied calmly. First, we need to address the immediate humanitarian crisis. I'll contact you within 6 hours with our response. The communication ended, and Elena walked into her house to make the calls that would mobilize humanity's response to the galaxy's greatest crisis in recorded history. Within 12 hours, human technical teams were deploying across galactic space. But their approach was unlike anything the alien civilizations had expected. Instead of immediately attempting repairs, the human teams spent their first days simply observing how the various species had been trying to solve their problems. On New Carthage, atmospheric engineer Sarah Kim watched as Hagemarki technicians struggled with a life support system that was producing breathable air but with oxygen levels that fluctuated dangerously. "You're fighting the system instead of working with it," she told Chief Engineer Morketh. "The atmospheric processor is trying to compensate for variables you haven't programmed it to recognize. Instead of forcing it to follow exact specifications, let it adjust within acceptable ranges." The suggestion seemed almost insultingly simple to Morketh, but when they implemented Kim's recommendation, the system stabilized immediately. More importantly, it began anticipating and preventing the fluctuations instead of just reacting to them. "How did you know?" Morketh asked, genuine curiosity replacing his initial skepticism. "Because machines are like people," Kim explained. "They work better when they have some flexibility to adapt to changing conditions. Your programming was like forcing someone to walk in a perfectly straight line. It's possible, but it's exhausting and unnecessary when a slightly curved path gets you to the same destination more efficiently." Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. Human engineers didn't just fix broken systems, they helped alien technicians understand why the systems had been working in the first place. The solutions weren't more complex, they were often surprisingly simple once someone explained the underlying principles. Dr. Vexathala worked alongside human programmer David Chen, nephew of the Dr. Chen whose archived suggestions she had studied, to restore the translation protocols that had been causing diplomatic incidents. "The key," Chen explained as they reviewed the code, "is understanding that communication isn't just about translating words. It's about translating intention, emotion, and cultural context. The computer needs to understand not just what someone is saying, but what they're trying to achieve by saying it." The restored translation systems didn't just prevent misunderstandings, they actively helped diplomats find common ground by suggesting alternative phrasings that would be better received by different cultures. As the immediate crisis stabilized, Elena returned to the council chambers for the first time in months, but her entrance was dramatically different from her quiet departure. The chamber fell silent as she walked to a platform that had been specially prepared at the center of the assembly, a position traditionally reserved for visiting heads of state. "Honored members of the Concord," Elena began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber that now hung on every word. "Humanity is prepared to resume participation in galactic affairs. However, the terms of our involvement have necessarily changed." Chancellor Zephyr, who now deferred to Elena with obvious respect, gestured for her to continue. "Humanity will not return as junior members seeking approval for our suggestions," Elena stated. "We will participate as equal partners in the governance and development of galactic civilization. Our technical teams will work alongside your engineers, not as consultants, but as colleagues. Our representatives will participate in council decisions not as observers, but as voting members with influence proportional to our demonstrated contributions." The chamber buzzed with quiet discussions as delegates considered these terms. They were not unreasonable, but they represented a fundamental shift in the balance of galactic power. Furthermore, Elena continued, humanity requests formal recognition of the universal principle of practical wisdom. That theoretical perfection must always be balanced with real-world functionality. This principle will guide our collaborative approach to technological development and diplomatic solutions. Ambassador Thekska of the Rigelian Collective spoke first. The collective recognizes that human insights have proven essential to optimal system performance. We support these proposals. Governor Zelnara of the Hegemarchy followed. The Hegemarchy has witnessed the effectiveness of human practical solutions. We agree to these terms. One by one, the representatives of galactic civilization formally acknowledged what had become undeniably obvious. Humanity's approach to problem-solving was not primitive or emotional, but rather a sophisticated form of intelligence that complemented their own analytical capabilities. The final vote was unanimous. As the session concluded, Chancellor Zephyr approached Elena personally. "Ambassador, I owe you an apology. We believed that our logical analysis was superior to human intuition. We failed to understand that true wisdom combines analytical precision with practical insight." Elena smiled, thinking of her grandmother's roses and the decades of careful tending that had made them flourish. "Chancellor, there's something important you should understand about humanity. We never left to prove a point or to punish anyone. We left because we were tired of being undervalued and ignored." She paused, looking around the chamber where human voices would now carry equal weight in decisions that shaped the fate of trillions of beings. "But you were right about one thing," Elena continued. "We are emotional creatures, and nothing motivates humans quite like being told we don't matter. It took a galaxy-wide crisis for you to realize our value, but it only took us one quiet exit to remind you that the most important contributions are often the ones you don't notice until they're gone." The transformation was complete. Humanity had returned to galactic civilization not as supplicants seeking acceptance, but as essential partners whose unique perspective was finally recognized and respected. The balance of power had shifted not through conquest or manipulation, but through the simple demonstration of what the galaxy lost when it dismissed human contributions as irrelevant. In the restored council chambers, where human flags now hung alongside those of ancient galactic powers, the quiet species had found its voice, and the galaxy would never again make the mistake of overlooking the profound wisdom hidden in humanity's practical, emotional, intuitive approach to the complex art of making impossible things work in an imperfect universe.